Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and fastest way to play daily fantasy sports. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play today. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code GOODSEATS. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Again, don't forget the promo code GOODSEATS at prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app today. And now, here's our show.
The Yankees rampage back with 2 runs on 3 hits. No errors and a man left. And the score at the end of 8 1/2 innings of play, it's the New York Yankees 9 and the Pittsburgh Pirates 9. And Ralph Terry, of course, on the mound will be facing Mazeroski. Once again, it was a hard-hit drive down the first base side. The Nelson fielded on the first hop and tagged the bag at first. That eliminated Berra. He was out. And then Mantle could have been in a rundown, but it was not the case. He dove back safely to first base. Here's a ball one, too high down to Mazeroski. And the Yankees have tied the game in the top of the 9th inning. Well, a little while ago when we mentioned that this one, in typical fashion, was going right to the wire, little did we know. Mark Ditmar throws. Here's a swing and a high fly ball going deep to left. This may do it. Back to the wall goes Berra. It is over the fence. Home run. The Pirates win.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Wow, can you feel the excitement? Hi, everybody. It's your pal, Tim Hanlon. How's it going? It's episode number 281, my goodness, of this little monstrosity we like to call Good Seats Still Available. Welcome to the proceedings. Thank you for finding us. You're a doctor of defunct reporting for duty, as we try to do for you each and every week. And the excitement knows no bounds this week as we go back to the Steel City. It's Pittsburgh, back into the spotlight with our old pal Dave Finoli returning from, when it was December of last year. We went deep in our episode 242 around the Civic Arena in Pittsburgh, also known as the Igloo. Some great stories there. And Dave is back with another book. And I need to sort of put this all in context. Dave Finoli is essentially the locus for all things sports history in and around Pittsburgh. He's got an assemblage of local authors and sports historians. Tom Rooney, a former guest on this show, Bob Healy, Doug Kavanaugh, Chris Fletcher, a bunch of others. They are essentially a rotating crew, if you will, of nostalgists and very deep historians on all things Pittsburgh sports, not just pro, but collegiate and all sort of facets. And Dave has ring-led yet another book. And if you go on to Amazon, you'll find just literally a dozen or two books on all kinds of different topics. We venture this week on this week's show to the brand new paperback book out by Dave and team called Where Pittsburgh Played, Oakland's, and we'll describe Oakland's, historic sports venues. And in particular, we get into, this is sort of a previous generation, maybe even 2 generations of some of the original venues that professional sports inhabited in Pittsburgh. In particular, we're talking about the Duquesne Gardens, which was essentially the indoor palace for all of the hockey and basketball and related indoor exploits in Pittsburgh's early professional sports history. We get into Pitt Stadium, which largely was a collegiate construct, obviously, for University of Pittsburgh, but also for a period of time, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, we also talk about the similarly legendary facility known as Forbes Field, also in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh, which is kind of the theme of these facilities back in the day. This is where the bulk of these places were kind of, and the sports sort of history was kind of located until at least the founding of things like Three River Stadium and other facilities, the Igloo, obviously in the late 60s. And you heard perhaps the most memorable moment, although there were plenty of others for sure, in certainly Forbes Field's history, maybe even Pittsburgh's sports history, although that's both highly debatable. The championship clinching home run by Bill Mazeroski in the 1960 World Series, by many accounts, perhaps the most exciting World Series game of all time. It was Game 7, tied at 9, the Pirates and the New York Yankees. And that call from Forbes Field, somewhat full of inconsistencies, some malapropisms from the legendary, however, Chuck Thompson, not a play-by-play guy for Pittsburgh by any means. No, that was from the NBC radio broadcast, national it was. He was on that call for that game. And you sort of hear there sort of the chaos, but in essence, make no mistake, that flub-filled call of that game, that World Series, it was certainly indicative of the excitement that was all over the Pittsburgh area by defeating the mighty New York Yankees in that 1960 World Series. That happened at Forbes Field, but a lot of other stuff happened at Forbes Field too. Not only baseball, but the beginnings of football, the very first American Football League in the 1930s, the original home of the Pittsburgh Steelers, even when they were known in some other forms. They were known as the Pittsburgh Pirates for a while, and there's a reason for that. We'll hear that in our conversation coming up with Dave Finoli. And also, interestingly, the one-year home, the one-season home, 1967, of the National Professional Soccer League, Pittsburgh Phantoms. I'm confusing Philadelphia because I'm now sort of waxing and waning into the world of 1940s NFL football, where the Cardinals of Chicago and the Pittsburgh Steelers for Card-Pitt that one year, that one season, but also the Steagles, one of our earliest episodes. Look up in your history books for that episode, where Philadelphia, the Eagles, and the Pittsburgh Steelers combined for a season. And these are during the war years, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. But they called Forbes Field home as well, both of those contracted NFL franchises. So lots of great history to be found in all of these places. And if you stick around, we'll also touch on, for very briefly, but memorably, a place also part of this lore, although not really any pro franchises of memory, the Fitzgerald Field House. And if you're an original Big East basketball fan, you'll want to stay tuned and hear a special clip and perhaps the most amazing memory in the long history of that place, the Fitzgerald Field House, perhaps you'll know what I'm talking about. But stay tuned for that. You'll hopefully remember as we have that clip for you and that memory as well. All of that coming up with our pal, our return guest, Dave Finoli. Holy Finoli, as we talk about Pittsburgh's outdoor and indoor first generation, let's call them, sports cathedrals, Oakland's historic sports venues, the Oakland section of Pittsburgh, where Pittsburgh played, coming up in a mere moment's time. A little promotional thing. Well, let's, we like to, when we talk about particular cities and regions, we like to especially dial up our pals at oldschoolshirts.com, because as you know, when you go to oldschoolshirts.com, not only will you be met with an awesome array of T-shirt collections, as the name implies, from the old school. If you're into dead malls, perhaps brands of the past or beer brands of the past, amusement parks, perhaps food locations, perhaps nightclubs, or even radio stations and restaurants and stadiums and the like. And yes, of course, various professional sports teams, especially those of yore. All you got to do is go to oldschoolshirts.com, and they've got a whole bunch of different tabs and collections and stuff. But the easiest thing to do, and you can look up by league, but go to the cities section, and literally you'll see most of the major cities in these here United States and also in Canada. Just search up, just go into the Northeast tab and scroll down to Pittsburgh. And what are you going to find at oldschoolshirts.com and the Pittsburgh section? Well, again, just about everything you could ever imagine from the past, commemorated in high quality and reasonably priced T-shirt form. Things like not only sports teams like the Pittsburgh Pipers, both versions of the ABA, or the Homestead Grays, or the Pittsburgh Condors, or the Pittsburgh Hornets, maybe even the Pittsburgh Spirit of the old MISL. I mean, the Pittsburgh Stingers of the old CISL, on and on and on. There are also memories of great locations where some of these sports and teams played, such as the aforementioned Forbes Field. Great shirt there. The Igloo from our previous episodes and discussions. Great shirt devoted to them. The old Igloo. Three Rivers Stadium, on and on and on. Even the Pittsburgh Pisces, right? The team that lives on in A Fish That Saved Pittsburgh, right? That wonderful film from the 70s. All of those things and more. We're talking Pittsburgh, you name it, but also all kinds of other places, cities, and similar from just about any major metropolitan area you can think of. All that kind of stuff and more at oldschoolshirts.com. They're adding more stuff all the time. So you want to bookmark it, visit, and purchase, wink, wink, early and often. And don't forget, please don't forget, for your sake and ours, the promo code Good Seats. That's the promo code Good Seats for 10% off every stinking thing you put in that cart at oldschoolshirts.com. They're based in Cincinnati, another wonderful city. And we thank P.F. Wilson and his friends there at oldschoolshirts.com for their continued support of this ridiculous little show. All right, let's step into more ridiculousness, shall we? Let's go deep, way deep into Pittsburgh sports history. We're going to talk about some of these old places no longer with us, most of them no longer with us, mostly centered in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh. Let's talk about where Pittsburgh played, shall we? Here's our conversation with Dave Finoli we had just a couple of days ago. Welcome back to the show, Dave. And as always, friends, please enjoy. The volume of stuff that you and your cohorts in the Steel City keep putting out on various aspects of Pittsburgh sports history is wondrous. And here we are again with yet another title. And maybe you can explain for our audience your role in that and the little assemblage of people and your little nickname for such assemblage. Is it what you've been doing and some of the other titles and areas of exploration that you all have been doing over the last couple of years?
Not a problem. Yeah, I basically will put together a table of contents, get the ideas going, sell sell the manuscript. We've been with the History Press the last few ones, and then I'll take about half the book and I'll divvy up some friends who are outstanding historians and are outstanding writers to boot, and give them an opportunity to pick what chapters they want to do on the end of it. That way you get a nice collection of different voices to tell these stories of oftentimes forgotten of Pittsburgh sports.
And what have you dubbed yourselves on occasion on some of these titles of books?
We have two separate things we do. The one we call ourselves the Association of Gentlemen Pittsburgh Journalists, and the other one we call ourselves the Association of Duquesne Scribes, which is when we have everybody from Duquesne University, which is my alma mater, and the other one we use when we have a little cross section of people from different universities. And this one we chose. There was I believe 5 of us, and we just put it in all our names. So we didn't use the moniker on this one.
So give me a sense before we get into sort of the specifics of this current book, Where Pittsburgh Played.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a sense of sort of the genesis of all of this, right? So you all have some kind of either direct or indirect connection to Pittsburgh. I'm assuming the bulk of you are lifelongers, or at least maybe in spirit if they've moved on to other places. Sort of what spurs you all to do this, and where has the history of these teams, these places, et cetera, existed before, and maybe why hasn't it existed before?
Well, we're all Pittsburgh sports fans. High majority still live in the area. But I mean, most of these people I've been friends with for most of my life. Couple like Tom Rooney and Doug Kavanaugh and Frank Garland met along the way. Tom, a Duquesne University graduate and former president of the Penguins, and Frank is an outstanding writer. I was a fan of his. He wrote on several Pittsburgh titles. And Douglas Kavanaugh lives in California, has only been to Pittsburgh once or twice, but he developed a love of the history of boxing in Pittsburgh, which in the first half of the century rivaled any city in the country. So in my mind, these guys were chosen not only because they're friends and great writers, but just their immense knowledge of sports in this area.
So for the uninitiated, can you explain a little bit of the sort of geography and maybe perhaps the neighborhoods of Pittsburgh? I know we've kind of nibbled at it in previous conversations, both with you, Tom Rooney, et cetera. But the name Oakland may be confusing to people who are not from the region, and I think it's important to kind of clarify.
Sure. Strangely enough, when I was a kid, we're talking 6-7 years old, and just becoming a huge baseball fan, I thought the Oakland A's played in Pittsburgh because of it. So, it actually is where the University of Pittsburgh is located. 90% of Oakland is split between Pitt and Carnegie Mellon University, the former Carnegie Tech. And it's pretty much, while there are some lifelong residents in the area, it's mostly a college town, so to speak, located probably about 2 miles from downtown Pittsburgh, so it's a very short ride from downtown Pittsburgh. But it is in essence the college section. There's I believe it's Chatham is also located there. So 3 decent sized colleges located in a small area of land.
But in that small area of land, and this is where the focus of the book is, was or has been a cradle, if you will, of sports in the Pittsburgh area, a lot of it professional, but obviously a lot of it also collegiate. What is it about sort of this section, maybe back in the day, perhaps versus the Heinz Fields or whatever it's called today, and the Three Rivers that came obviously prior, and all the sort of more downtown-ish kind of facilities that exist today?
Well, I was talking to Tom about it, and it just kind of hit us that sports between really 1909 and 1960, when the Civic Arena was built, every major sporting event happened pretty much between a few block area. Before we decided to do the book, I actually started there. Forbes Field wall still exists. They never tore it down, a section of the wall. So I started there, and I walked up to where the Duquesne Gardens were, which was the indoor arena, big indoor arena at Pittsburgh at the time. Then walked where Pitt Stadium stood, and then finished my walk where the Fitzgerald Field House stands now, which used to house Pitt's basketball and now is the home of their nationally ranked volleyball team. And it was only like a 15, 20-minute walk, literally, and I was taking my time. So literally, you could have seen any major sporting event in Pittsburgh within a 10 or 15-minute walk of each other. And we thought, this is, in a city this size, that was kind of unique. And the stadiums weren't built at once. They were built, years apart from each other. Duquesne Gardens had been up since the end of the 19th century. Forbes Field was the first brick and mortar stadium built in the National League. Shad Park being the first one in baseball. And then Pitt Stadium was built in 1925. And in the 50s, they had a dump of a basketball arena and decided to build the Fitzgerald Field House, which is nearing its final days as a new volleyball and wrestling arena are being built on campus. So at one point in time, as I said, it housed every major collegiate and professional team in Pittsburgh.
All right, well, let's start. So there are really two areas. I mean, obviously Pitt Stadium, almost, I think exclusively, if I'm not mistaken, was for University of Pittsburgh. Correct? There were.
It was not. Carnegie Mellon also played their games there, and Duquesne University, which played the bulk of their games at Forbes Field, also played some football at Pitt Stadium. It was at one point in time, as the 30s were coming to an end, 3 of the top 15 teams in the country resided only 2 miles from each other in Carnegie Tech, Pitt, and Duquesne. But Carnegie Tech, when they were a major football team, did play all their games at Pitt Stadium.
From a professional perspective, though, Pitt did have a couple of dalliances with some pro games, right? Not very much, but they did, if I'm not mistaken, house the Steelers for a couple of seasons, or maybe alternated some games, if I've got that right.
They did. They actually moved over there when Three River Stadium, although it didn't come into its completion until 1970, was actually formulated in the mid-50s to the point where the Pirates sold Forbes Field to the University of Pittsburgh, which ended up building their famed graduate business school there and another school named after the chancellor in the 70s, Wesley Posvar. But that had all come to a head in the late 50s, and the Pirates only thought they were going to be there for a couple of years. So the Steelers, thinking they were only going to be there a couple of years, ended up having to make a deal with Pitt at Pitt Stadium, since Forbes Field had been sold, to play their games there, thinking that they wouldn't have a home in the 60s. So they ended up staying there through the 1960s, and Chuck Noll's first year was at Pitt Stadium, and he won his first game as a coach and then lost the next 13. So if anybody thought the Chuck Noll era was nothing but winning, it took him a few years before he was able to get the Steelers to a championship level. And that first year was the last year at Pitt Stadium, and they played one of their worst, if not their worst, seasons in the history of the franchise.
So, okay, so let me get this straight. So the Steelers then, they only played that one season at Pitt? No, they played...
No. They played the whole decade.
Got it. Okay, so...
60s.
So, yeah, so essentially the Pitt Stadium was essentially sort of a multiple home then. It was between sort of the college team and the Steelers. I mean, but Pitt owned the stadium, though, right? So I'm guessing they were sort of the... less.
Yeah, Pitt on the stadium, and the reason it got to be as grand as it was, when they were building it, the Chancellor Bowman, was not a fan of the football program, and he was putting all his focus into the other major building on campus, which remains today the Cathedral of Learning, which at one point in time was the largest on-campus building in the country. And because he wasn't paying attention, the $1.1 million budget to build Pitt Stadium grew to $2.1 million. And when he got the bill, he was quite irritated and the team was kind of forced into paying its players, which got them the best players in the land. And for 9 years, they were among, if not the best program in the land, winning 5 national championships. So Pitt Stadium kind of had a hand in that, as it ended up doubling the cost of it during the time it was built. But yes, they were the owners of it. And ironically, the basketball arena for Pitt basketball was located under one of the gates in Pitt Stadium. It was a small facility, but until the Fitzgerald Field House was built, it was this cold, dank arena where the visiting team had a locker room outside the stadium, had to walk in the cold to get into the stadium, and supposedly fans never took their coat off because there was no heating.
All right, so here's my source of confusion. So, and then we'll sort of radiate backwards and forwards into this, right? The Steelers, for a period of time, I want to say it was between, 58 and 63-ish. Mm-hmm. It looks to me that they kind of shared or alternated or bounced between, or some other description, between playing home games at Forbes Field, the venerable baseball stadium, and multi-purpose, if you will, before that was even a term, and Pitt Stadium. Do I have this right, that some of the seasons they were either alternating, or either during the season or alternating from season to season during that period of time?
Actually, between 1933, when they came into existence, and I want to say either 60 or 61, they were at Forbes Field. When they came to Pitt Stadium, they were at Pitt Stadium. Now, they might have played a couple games at Pitt Stadium when they were in Forbes Field, but it wasn't considered like a co-home or a home until then. It was only when they thought there would be no Forbes Field existing that they ended up going to Pitt Stadium.
Interesting. Okay, got it. So, because the internet can sort of be a misleading sort of character, but it looks like there was some overlap, and I wonder too, I guess aloud, if there were perhaps some conflicts, right? Either college versus pro football in Pitt Stadium, or maybe even a playoff dalliance or two on the baseball side that perhaps forced the team to kind of go between one stadium and one field and another during that period of time, as well as the uncertainty of ownership.
It might have been early on. There might have been some conflicts, but as far as college football, by that point in time, I don't think Duquesne would have pushed them out, and that's who would have been playing at the time, mainly at Forbes Field. And unfortunately, between 1925 and 1960, there were no playoff games for the Pirates, as they had a 35-year layoff between World Series at that point. But a regular season game might have pushed them into Pitt Stadium for a time or two, but I wouldn't consider Pitt Stadium their home at that point.
Sure. All right. So let's go back then to Forbes, because in many respects, for the length of its existence, and it's now an historical landmark on a state level and certainly on a city level and stuff. This is back in 1909 when it was created, and it didn't close until 1970. Talk about venerable. But I guess the question really is there. It seems to me like ostensibly in 1909, it was all Pittsburgh Pirates baseball as the rationale for the stadium. But either through foresight or just sheer need, it really kind of became Pittsburgh's first generation multi-purpose stadium. Is it probably more because it was the only, if you will, game in town to domicile the fledgling football team or a soccer team or a Negro League team? Or was it envisioned as being more than just a baseball home?
It was envisioned as being a baseball home. The major reason it was built there, the stadium for the Pirates before that, Exposition Park, was built where Three Rivers Stadium was built and where Heinz Field is now. But the problem was there was no flood control. So the outfield would often flood. There were ground rules in case the outfield was flood. If it hits in this, it's a double, things like that. Fred Clark, the manager of the Pirates, actually developed the first tarp to cover the infield because of the flooding. So Oakland was chosen because it was as far away from the river in the city of Pittsburgh as they were going to get. So it was basically envisioned for baseball, and Barney Dreyfuss, who certainly was a man who I'm sure didn't mind collecting the revenue from the other sports. I'm sure there's no question that they would allow these teams to play there when they had their chances. They played a lot of football at Exposition Park too. But it was the home for a lot of colleges back then. Washington and Jefferson, who won a national championship, I believe, in 1921. The famous 0-0 tie at the Rose Bowl against the powerful California team. Played some games there. Pitt was obviously playing their games there until 1925. Duquesne, as they were in the beginnings of their program, were playing there, as was Carnegie Tech, which upset Newt Rockne and Notre Dame at Forbes Field. So it was, and there were a lot of fights there over the course of the history of Forbes Field, including the great, memorable Jersey Joe Walcott, Ezra Charles fight in the late 50s. So it was home to a lot of different sports, and I'm not sure it was envisioned that way, but as I said, the way Exposition Park was used, there's no surprise that ended up that way.
So Pitt was playing football there collegiately, almost from the beginning of Forbes's debut in 1909. Yeah,
until 25. So they had quite a bit of time in there.
Well, so it's really especially interesting because I guess as the Steelers came about in the then fledgling NFL, it didn't. There was really no other. It just became the obvious place to play. There really wasn't any other place of some substantial seating and arrangement really for them to play. How was, based on your research, how was that relationship of the Steelers and the Pirates and Forbes Field, right? It's clear, at least in hindsight, that the Pirates are probably the first and foremost tenant of Forbes, or was it somewhat cordial? I can't imagine it was cordial in the beginning.
Well, it actually was. Don't forget it was 1933 when the Steelers came into being, so it was quite a few years after the stadium opened. And Art Rooney was a huge fan of the Pirates, and you know that because that was the name of the Steelers for their first 7 or 8 seasons, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it was done in honor of the baseball team. So he was a huge fan of the Pirates, and
which was by the way,
they didn't
fairly common for fledgling NFL teams, right? We've seen these name shares,
sure.
and the baseball ownership trying to sort of get in on maybe what was the next big pro sports thing in football.
Yeah, but it was a struggling enterprise through the first, probably for about 20, 25 years after that, till the 60s, did it start becoming a big thing. The Steelers were definitely second place in the city at that point, if not third, to college football teams. But they didn't get a team until we had the Pennsylvania Blue Laws back then, which prohibited sporting events from being played on a Sunday. So the reason it took so long to get a team is they had to wait for the Blue Laws to be taken away, so the Steelers could play on a Sunday. In fact, there was a little lag time between when the Pennsylvania legislature voted to do away with them and when it actually happened. So the first few weeks of the Steelers were basically played in the middle of the week because of that, before finally getting to play on Sundays. But no, there was no. Art Rooney was a huge fan of the Pirates. He was a baseball player. He was a very, very good minor league baseball player, along with one of the best boxers in the country. He had qualified for the 1920 Olympics in boxing and ended up not going. But he was a baseball fan first, even though he made his fortune in football. But that fortune didn't happen for a while. It took a while before the Steelers, Pirates, and then 1940, I believe, is when they became the Steelers.
I do not know the answer to this, but do you have any sense as to why the name was changed from the Pirates after the 39 season to Steelers in 1940, especially given that they were still playing in the same stadium and were essentially, loved by both sides?
I think it was more or less to differentiate the team against the Pirates. Were what the Steelers are in the city today was the Pirates. I mean, they were that much loved among the other teams. So from what I had read, it was done to kind of differentiate things a little bit.
Clearly, though, as the franchise floundered, or like the collective league during the war years, tried to keep things afloat. We've talked about this on previous episodes. Forbes was also the home of the hastily crafted Steagles of 1943 and the oddly and maybe aptly named Card-Pitt of 1944 as well. Was there any I'm curious as to how the stadium and or the fan base handled those two odd creations those 2 years. It seems like people were just kind of doing what they could to at least keep pro football alive in Pittsburgh.
Well, it was Art Rooney and his thought of the league first, which is why Pittsburgh ended up in the AFC. Agreeing to move when the leagues consolidated to make an even number, and nobody wanted to move. So Art Rooney, league first, decided he would move. Back then, there wasn't enough players, so if you wanted to stay alive, you had to combine some teams, and then Art Rooney was at the forefront of being there for the league and what it needed. The Steagles actually were a winning team, and neither the Steelers nor the Eagles had much winning in the beginning of their first decade of existence. Now the Steagles were led primarily by young members of the Eagles, who would end up being NFL champions a couple of years later, and Well, I'm not sure the city was necessarily in love with it. They certainly weren't in love with the Card-Pitts, as there was no Pennsylvania connection, and that was considered, if not the worst NFL team of all time, in the top 2 or 3. But I mean, there was, even today, there's a lot written about the Steagles and what they meant, and the city liked winning football, which, as I said, they didn't have much experience with by that point. And if I'm not mistaken, they were undefeated at Forbes Field in their couple games they played there. But luckily for them, it was primarily led by Eagle players, which kind of led them to the win. But, City liked winning. So I guess, and they still kind of like talking about the Steagles, and there's been a lot written about them. They're considered more of Pittsburgh than the Card-Pitts certainly were.
All right, what's this? Prize Picks. My goodness, of course, the easiest and fastest way to play daily fantasy sports is Prize Picks. What is it? Well, glad you asked. Literally, it's straightforward and the simplest and most fun way you can do daily fantasy sports. All you got to do is pick as few as 2 or as many as 5 different players in a sport, or frankly across a whole multitude of sports, and simply predict whether those players will get more or less than their projection. Maybe in baseball, that's strikeouts. They're going to pitch more or less strikeouts than predicted. How about in football? That could be touchdown passes. In basketball, that could be 3-point shot attempts made, etc. Literally, all you got to do is pick whether they're more or less than their predicted outcomes. And you can choose and mix and match sports as well. You don't have to pick 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 players in just one sport. No, you can pick a couple of players across different sports. And boy, oh boy, when I say different sports, Prize Picks has a wide variety. It's all the major leagues and sports that you can think of, from the NFL and Major League Baseball, all the way into various niche sports like MMA or disc golf, perhaps even lacrosse or various forms of boxing or even esports. Prize Picks has daily fantasy picks for you across all of those and more. Again, try them out. It's really easy and it's a hell of a lot of fun, and you can win big bucks too. You can go the flex play model, which basically means you don't have to choose and succeed with every single one of your picks, but you'll still get paid. Or you can go the power play mode, which basically rewards you with more money if you get every single one of your predictions correct. It's awesome, and it's fun to play for sure, and it really brings your live sports viewing into a whole different realm of excitement. And of course, we've got a promo for you as well. So all you got to do is download the Prize Picks app on your Android or your Apple device, or go to prizepicks.com. That's PRIZEPICKS.com, and sign up and play your daily fantasy sports right now. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code GOODSEATS. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Again, don't forget to enter the promo code GOODSEATS when you sign up at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app, and get that instant deposit match right up to $100. Go for it. It's a hell of a lot of fun. Thank you, Prize Picks. And now back to our conversation. Pitt Stadium was opened in 1925 and was ostensibly more, well, was it more of a football-oriented stadium? I know some baseball was played there too. But
it was 95% football. The other tenants were the Pitt track and field team and the Pitt soccer team. And they were, track had a notable history, but soccer really didn't until the current programs, which are both nationally ranked. But it was 95% a football stadium. If they played baseball there, it was very little. that the Pitt team would have played there.
Yeah, I guess to an outsider, then I'm just curious as to why, being it more football centric, why perhaps the Steelers perhaps didn't somehow work towards Pitt being a better stadium environment than a much more baseball centric and oriented, I guess, in terms of seats and all that stuff at Forbes Field. Was it because of the ownership structure of the baseball Pirates? Was Rooney more? I mean, I'm just curious as to maybe why.
I don't know 100%, but I know he had a good relationship with the Pirates, and I'm sure that was a major part of it. As I said, he didn't move over to Pitt till he felt he was kind of forced to. And he didn't think he was going to be there that long. As government red tape took what should have been a stadium built in the early 60s, and it wasn't until the 70s that it ended up opening. So we're talking 12 to 15 years between the time they approved Three River Stadium and the time it actually opened. So it was a long while.
How about on the baseball front? People also sort of forget that the Homestead Grays, a legendary team of the Negro Leagues, played more than their fair share of games at Forbes Field. I don't think exclusively, but quite a bit.
No. Greenlee Field was a few miles down the road. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the Oakland section of Pittsburgh, which it wasn't included here. But it was one of the, if not the first, black-owned stadium in the country, built and owned. It was built for the Pittsburgh Crawfords, which was Pittsburgh's other legendary Negro League team. And the Grays did play some games there, but if you had to, well, they didn't play all their games at Forbes in the 30s. If you had to name a home field for it, that would have been the home field, would have been Forbes. And
how much were you able to determine the original, I guess, and how many different variations have there been over the years of the quote-unquote American Football League? There was this thing called the Pittsburgh Americans in 36 and 37 at Forbes. Maybe for the first sort of, real true go-round, perhaps almost to the point of giving sort of a challenge, if you will, to the fledgling NFL, which was still very much fledgling, right? So nothing was sort of guaranteed that the NFL was sort of, they too also called Forbes Field home. And I got to think that was a little concerning and consterning to the Steelers as well, how two teams playing in the same facility.
It was, but it wasn't unlike when the Maulers came here in the 80s. I mean, the Steelers pretty much outdrew it, got the news coverage. They may have been threatened at first. I don't think they were threatened once it was taking place. So it didn't really come close to succeeding in Pittsburgh, but they were there. I mean, it certainly was another team that called Pittsburgh home.
Another team that's obviously near and dear to my heart, I think you mentioned it a little bit in this book, is the one-year wonder and the only real outdoor professional top tier, although there have been some lower-level teams and indoor, was soccer in 1967. Obviously, Forbes Field, a little long in the tooth, getting long in the tooth at that point. Pirates moved out in 70. But this National Professional Soccer League domiciled one of its teams for one season called the Pittsburgh Phantoms. What were you able to determine or learn from that, or has that sort of been hard to find and or construed to history?
Well, no, it wasn't hard to find. That actually, I can say was probably my favorite chapter to research, because the only knowledge I had of the team was it existed. And basically, as we found out through the research, they had the members of the newly formed Penguins. A lot of the owners of the Penguins were the ones that bought the Phantoms. In 1966, you had England winning the World Cup, kind of firing up soccer in this area for a little bit. And they thought they could make a run at soccer because of the excitement of the World Cup. And they went and they put together a lot of high-priced players, but they weren't that good. And as it turned out, they put themselves into bankruptcy after the first year and almost destroyed the Penguins along with it, because a lot of these guys were owners of the Penguins too, and now they were having financial issues. So, it started out well. They did well their first couple games, and then it just died as the year went on. They found out the guy who was their talent coordinator was also the agent for these players and sucking more money out of the Phantoms than they probably would have had to had it been done ethically. So it was a very interesting chapter to research. And then to find out it almost was the end of the Penguins in only the first or second year because of it. That was kind of an interesting point.
I did not realize that the Penguins' early history, this is very interesting because 1967, the one season of the Phantoms and the one season of the National Professional Soccer League, and we've talked about this in the past. It was one of two pro leagues that came out of nowhere in the shadow or the halo of the 1966 World Cup in England. A lot of enthusiasm. A lot of baseball owners got themselves involved, thinking this was the next big thing. And then obviously a merger the next year. NPSL, the rogue league, because they didn't have the official sanctioning from FIFA, the world body, and but they did have a television contract with CBS. Lots to unpack there, but the timing is interesting, and now this is only sort of hitting me over the head. This is also when the NHL was expanding for the first time, with Pittsburgh being one of those franchises. So that's, talk about biting off more than you can chew. It's got to be tough enough to get a new NHL franchise going, as well as the arena, the Igloo that we're talking about in previous episodes. But getting a soccer franchise brand new at the same time, that's nuts.
Yeah. And as I said, we may not have been talking about 5 Stanley Cups had the financial issue gone a little more south.
I guess the question there, maybe we don't have an answer to it, I guess the question is why, right? Given an expansion of the NHL, getting a franchise domiciled there, why would one be distracted by this fledgling thing in soccer of all things on top of that?
They thought it was going to be the next hot thing. Everybody had always, in my lifetime, just about every year, soccer is going to be a big thing here. Soccer's the next big thing here. And it really never became the next big thing until the last 10 years. Whereas now the MSL or MLS averages about 25,000 a game. But it was that enthusiasm that in 1966 that, okay, now it's biggest game, because it's been the biggest game in the world for how long? And, everybody's always predicted it was going to be the next big thing here. But
do you think there's more to be discovered in the Pittsburgh Phantoms story? Do you think maybe perhaps you or your band of merry sports writers perhaps could be convinced to maybe go a little deeper into this story? Because it just, to me, it already seems fascinating and underreported about this sort of combination of Pittsburgh Penguins and that timing and all that stuff. Sounds like there's some drama that sort of hasn't been really discovered.
There might be a little more for the soccer club per se. I think, more of the story would be after the soccer team. As far as was this one of the major causes for the Penguins having in their first 10 years, it was almost every other year we were afraid of losing the team because of financial issues. Was this just the beginning of it, or was it something that remained consistent or, throughout? That would be probably the story of soccer that still needs to be uncovered. Ironically, they ended up buying the indoor team, the Spirit, which had been wildly popular at the beginning of their tenure and kind of waited off towards the end. But there was a point when the Spirit were popular that there was talk. Do we sell the Penguins and keep the Spirit, or sell the Spirit and keep the Penguins. So there was no guarantee that that soccer wasn't going to mix the Penguins, or at least force them to be sold a second time.
Yeah, the irony is very, very strong there for sure. Given and the Spirit too had their own storylines, right? I mean, they kind of went dormant for a year or so, and they were one of the original franchises, and they came back in the MISL and all that kind of stuff, and that sort of that just the endless fascination there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember as a college freshman in '79, and I mean, it was fun to go. I mean, we spent a lot of time at Spirit games during that time period. It was a good product that unfortunately outpriced itself because they went after more expensive talent as time went on. Not the Spirit necessarily. Well, the Spirit did. They signed a guy named Stan Terlicki, who was a great Polish soccer player, and he was he was a guy that kind of led them during their good playoff era.
All right. Well, let's put a pin in the Forbes Field thing. Maybe just a couple of moments on its quality as a baseball ballpark and its uniquenesses, and perhaps maybe how and why it sort of came to its demise in the late '60s, 1970 or so. It was kind of from a baseball perspective was kind of known as a pitcher-friendly ballpark, if I'm not mistaken.
Huge outfield, yeah. Huge outfield, huge foul area. So, yeah, it was very much a pitcher park. I always tell a story, and I've mentioned a few of the books, that Forbes Field is remembered and romanticized because it hasn't been around for a while. The stands they built down the third base side, half of them you couldn't see home plate from. It had gone into disarray, and I remember when my dad was going to the first game at Three Rivers in 1970. Now, I was 8 at the time, and he came in the room and was talking to me about it. He knew I was a huge baseball fan. And I asked him, Dad, why are you more excited about this than Forbes Field? He said, Son, the place is in disarray, and it smelled like stale beer and urine. So people weren't unhappy Forbes Field was going away in 1970. They were unhappy Forbes Field went away in 1990s, 20-some years removed. It was not necessarily the perfect place to watch a game, nor was Three Rivers for that standpoint. It was not a great baseball stadium, but when you win 2 World Series in 8 years and capture so many division titles, it's the memories that make the stadium great. And that's what made Three Rivers great for baseball. But Forbes Field was decaying at the end, decaying badly, and you needed a new stadium. I'm sure, and from what I read, it was going to be too costly to fix up Forbes Field, and you were getting a multi-team stadium in Three Rivers Stadium. So it was great for the time period when it was built, had a lot of memories in it. But had it existed today, the infrastructure in Pittsburgh, that's why Pitt Stadium was not a good facility towards the end. The infrastructure is one road out, one road in. And to go to a game at Pitt Stadium in the 90s, you had to get there about 3 or 4 hours before to find a parking space. Hopefully it's far enough away from the stadium that you don't have to sit in traffic for 2 or 3 hours. And I imagine Forbes Field had similar issues because it was just a couple blocks below where Pitt Stadium was. And it had the same issues, one road in, one road out. So it might have been nice to romanticize about Forbes Field staying, but the logistics of it, the infrastructure of it, and the way it was at the time, it needed to go.
Well, sure. And also when it was built, right, it was sort of part of that sort of generation of the first generation, if you will, of those steel and concrete facilities that were essentially replacing the largely wooden constructions of the decades before that.
Absolutely. It was the second built in baseball after Shad Park. So yeah, it was right at the beginning, and it was considered a palace when it was built.
Still pieces of it exist. I believe there's a home plate that sort of lives on somewhere. Maybe I think somewhere in the University of Pittsburgh's facility.
It exists in Posvar Hall. It's not in the exact place it was, which would be like right outside a door at the hall if it was put in as the exact place. But it's put in the middle of the lobby, so people can see that. And about half the wall was left intact. And on October 13th, the anniversary of Mazeroski's home run every year, the game is played on radio. Hundreds of fans come down every year, and it starts at 1 o'clock and ends at 3:37, just like it did in real life. So, it's kind of a neat place to visit. And on that day, if you ever have the chance to go, it's a lot of fun, a lot of good memories.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously some legendary games of the time. Not only of Major League Baseball, but also Negro League Baseball, certainly football. But you also mentioned earlier boxing, maybe a moment or two about just how significant a venue Forbes was for boxing, and maybe perhaps at that time, why boxing was such a thing back in the day, open air stadium in particular.
Pittsburgh had many world champions over the course of the first 50 years of the 20th century. Harry Greb, Jackie Wilson, Billy Conn, just to name a few. The great Charlie Burley, who is considered one of the top 10 middleweights of all time, who never had a chance, was an African-American boxer, never had a chance to fight for the title, partially because of that, partially because during World War II, when he fought, a lot of titles were frozen while the champions were off fighting. But they were all from Pittsburgh. It was a huge sport in the area. And some of the bigger fights, Billy Conn fought there quite a few times at Forbes Field, as well as they all fought at the Duquesne Gardens, which was the Civic Arena before the Civic Arena was built, and was located about 2 blocks to the east of Forbes Field. But it was a huge deal in Pittsburgh at the time, and well attended. In fact, the biggest Pirate crowd of the year, I believe it was 1941 when Conn fought Lewis, came to a fight which was in essence the first pay-per-view fight. They stopped the Pirate game in the first or second inning as the fight was starting, and the fans listened to the fights from New York. Conn Lewis won until it was over. Then they resumed the game, and the game ended up being postponed because it went past 1 o'clock, which was the National League curfew for games. But that's how big it was that even they drew the biggest Pirate game of all, or the Pirate crowd of the year, so people could hear the Conn Lewis fight. It was pretty huge.
That also speaks to the fact that Pittsburgh has just always been a damn good sports town. And you mentioned it, so why don't we quickly segue over there to the Duquesne Gardens, because, it was called the Duquesne Garden until 1940. I guess it was 1890 or so. It broke ground, I think, in 1886, but I who knows when it was actually. I think the ice rink didn't happen until 1895 or so.
1890s, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's correct.
But then in 1940, I guess it was rechristened to the Gardens.
Yes.
But maybe a little bit of sort of early and an ongoing history there, because to your point, right, this was the indoor facility, if you will, for the bulk of the early part of the century. And when it came to hockey and even a little bit of basketball, this was both the collegiate as well as the professional sort of place for the vast majority of those endeavors.
Absolutely. We had a team called the Pittsburgh Yellow Jackets, which was an amateur team at the beginning of, amateur in name only. They came out, they were paying Canadians, the better Canadian players, such as Hall of Famer Lionel Connicher, to come down. And they won 2 United States championships early on at the Gardens. They morphed into the Pittsburgh Pirates, which was our NHL team, our first NHL team that few people actually realize that the Penguins weren't the first NHL team in Pittsburgh. The Pirates played there for a few years before they went belly up and sold the franchise to Philadelphia. But the first lines, in hockey, it used to be your best 5 players played the majority of the game. The line system was developed in Pittsburgh, as the Hornets were really the first team to utilize that in hockey. And that happened at the Gardens. Eventually, when they left, that's when our more famed team from the AHL, the Pittsburgh Hornets, which were here until the Penguins shut up in 67, came in, and they were the key tenant at the Duquesne Gardens at that point. Duquesne University basketball was played there, and in the late 30s to probably about 59 or 60, Duquesne was on par with what Duke and Kentucky would be today. They were one of the better teams in the country, in fact, winning the 1955 national championship when they won the NIT, which was the better of the 2 tournaments back then. So they were a key tenant of the Gardens. The Ice-Capades began at the Gardens.
The actual Ice-Capades began in the Gardens, the actual franchise?
Yeah. They were brought in as a between periods event, and people actually to see Sonia Henne, she was a great gold medalist at the time in the Olympics, and people had come to see her, and the crowds were so big that the owner of the Hornets, John Harris, began the Ice-Capades, and shows were dedicated to just ice skaters. But that was because of it happened at the Duquesne Gardens. Our one NBA team, the Pittsburgh Ironmen, in 1947, the first year of the league, it was a Basketball Association of America, which the NBA considers their first season. Pittsburgh Ironmen played there. We're a horrible team, and was voted actually by a website 538 as when they did a thing for every professional NBA team, they were voted as the worst in the history of the league. So we have that designation at the Garden. So it was quite a used facility.
Yeah, and I think people also forget on the hockey side there, the Pittsburgh Pirates, there's that name again, in the late 1920s in the NHL. People forget that the original 6 actually was preceded by a bunch of teams, some of them mongrel, some of them more better equipped and more interesting than, but the whitewash, right, after that period of time. And the Pirates were very much part of the NHL for that period of time in the Duquesne Gardens. Yeah, absolutely. They also moved on to the Philadelphia, become the Quakers for 2 years as well before the team sort of went its way and stuff.
Went its own way.
So tell me, I guess, how much from what you were able to determine this history of hockey within the Duquesne Gardens. I mean, obviously, that was the fact of that the minor leagues and even on the collegiate level, hockey was obviously a substantially interesting pursuit in Pittsburgh sports, enough that by the mid '60s there was enough of a groundswell to for the NHL to finally look at not only expanding itself, but to actually looking at Pittsburgh as being one of the first franchises to expand to in 1967.
Yes. No, it had a great history. In fact, we found out when we did our book Pittsburgh First that the U.S. hockey team began in Pittsburgh. It was put together in Pittsburgh in 1920 and sent to the Summer Olympics, where hockey started, before ending up in the Winter Olympics. So you have that. You have research found a few years ago that the first professional players came out of Pittsburgh. So professional hockey started here. So, I mean, it has, quite a history before the Penguins.
Why did it last so long? I mean, this is a facility that essentially was, kind of up and running in the 1890s. It didn't close until 1956. That's a hell of a run. I'm guessing it wasn't necessarily because it was so well constructed and well loved, or was it?
Not necessarily. Those who play basketball there always criticize the floor as wet and uneven. You didn't get true dribbles all the time on it. But with that, it was a shock when it was announced it was coming down. In fact, the Civic Arena wasn't close to being ready. So the Hornets had to be put in the closet, so to speak, for 5 years until the Civic Arena opened up, because they just kind of stunned people. They sold it. I mean, it was sold for profit. It wasn't taken down for because it was decaying or anything like that, but they had a chance, I guess, to make a good deal, and they made it.
Well, like a lot of those facilities, right? The turnover between a basketball and a hockey kind of operation, right? Not always the easiest thing to do. And I'm guessing that, modern day needs, especially when you throw in things like musical concerts and whatnot, make it even that much more difficult.
Yeah. No, it was not an easy thing by any stretch of the imagination, but from all accounts, it seemed like it was a little worse than the norm.
What was sort of the denouement of that facility? The Pittsburgh Civic Arena, I guess, was 3 miles away from the Gardens. That actually began in the late 50s, the construction of that, right? So I guess it was essentially people kind of just hanging on at the Gardens, hoping that the new facility would be done sooner rather than later.
Well, yeah, it had been approved, again, like Three-River Stadium, a lot earlier than it actually opened. But it unfortunately wasn't until 1961 when the facility would open. So, as I said, they had a dormant Hornets that finally had a chance to get back on the ice. And John Harris, who owned the Hornets, actually was given an NBA franchise that season. He got mad because a player he wanted from the Celtics, Bill Sherman, who was the Hall of Fame coach, he wanted him to lead his team. And the Celtics kind of reneged on that at the last minute. He got mad, decided he could want an NBA franchise, so he gave up the NBA franchise at that point. Guy came in who was given a team in the ABL, which was a predecessor to the ABA, and had a team called the Pittsburgh Wrens. He had a chance to get the NBA team, but he decided to take the ABL team because he figured he had a better chance to win with a new league rather than taking an expansion team, which ended up being one of the more short-sighted things in Pittsburgh sport history. We could have had an NBA franchise here.
Well, you kind of did, though. Well, not really an NBA franchise, right? We cannot never forget, and we've talked about this on the Igloo conversations in the past, of course, the mighty Pisces of the fish that saved Pittsburgh.
Which we actually have a chapter in a book we just began that details the 70s in Pittsburgh. So we have a thing on the Pittsburgh Pisces, being it was a nice part of it. So
let me ask you that. So round out this the Duquesne Gardens. I mean, I mean, you mentioned, I mean, obviously there was some opportunity there for Pittsburgh to be more of a basketball town. Obviously, the ABA and some of the dalliances prior in the BAA, Duquesne Gardens. I mean, what was it a little? I guess the real question there is why wasn't and why hasn't Pittsburgh been more of a pro basketball town over the years? And did the facilities over those decades in basketball's early years as a professional kind of endeavor, did that have any effect or hindrance on Pittsburgh being a town for pro ball?
I don't think so. I think in the 50s, the Duquesne team was so successful that it basically was the charm of the city and drew well. When Pitt plays well, they draw well. I don't think it's professional basketball that didn't draw well here, because the Pipers, as they were winning the first title, were drawing very well towards the end. And had they been allowed to stay here rather than taken to Minnesota, so the league could have a franchise in where the league offices were, I think the Pipers might have had a 50-50 shot of being one of those teams taken into the NBA, because we had the market, and they were starting to draw very well at the arena towards the end of that. And I think with that team coming back, I think it would have continued to be a success, to the point where when the Penguins were having financial trouble, it would have been worse, because they would have had competition to draw against. And I think that would have killed the Penguins had the Pipers stayed. But I don't think it has anything to do with pro basketball as much as opportunities, and Pittsburgh will support a winner. If we had an NBA team that won, it would probably have gotten the proper support to stay here.
All right, two more things on hoops, because you also do you talk about a couple of other facilities here, and I kind of want to end on one of them. But you mentioned it earlier, but describe to me, you've got a chapter in your book, there used to be a basketball arena here. So this Pitt Pavilion that was actually built underneath Pitt Stadium, how, why, and what was that experience sort of like? How big was that even? And what kind of a facility was that?
It was dirty. It was a couple thousand people. It actually made me laugh when I was researching the first game there, how the lighting was great, blah, blah, blah. And within 5 years, everybody was trashing it. It was cold. There was no heating in it. The opposition team had to dress in a dressing room outside the stadium. So basically had to go outside to get back into the stadium to play. They said it was dirty. They said the floor was horrible. The lighting ended up not being too good. It was just not a good place to play in. I can't imagine the airflow was real good. I saw it once in the late 80s. They just had it down there as a storage facility at that point, before eventually turning it into a weight room for the football team. It looked pretty dank. I can't imagine whose idea that was, but I'm sure it saved them a lot of money. And, they ended up having them 2 national championship teams there. So we had some success.
All right. Well, I want to end on this. And obviously we tend to spend more time on pro sports and what used to be in that realm, but we also like to dig into various facilities and stuff. But while we're on the topic of Pitt basketball, and this is near and dear to my heart, because I went to Georgetown undergrad and remember the early and classic days of the Big East. But you do spend some time in this book regaling in a lot of the formers, but it's still around today, this Fitzgerald Field House. And during the Pittsburgh Panthers had quite a bit of time playing their basketball games in that facility, the Fitzgerald Field House. But one of the most memorable moments of that time during the big bad days of the Big East, you want to set it up and talk about it, because it's a classic moment in college basketball history. And as long as Billy Raftery continues to be on the microphones of college basketball games, he will be always synonymous with this moment. I think crafted just in the moment. But you have a chapter devoted to it. You want to talk about it?
Oh, I'll tell you what. When Pitt was at its prime there, especially during the Big East days, there was no louder place than the Fitzgerald Field House. I remember Al Michaels saying about the Olympic Russia-United States game that sound had feel that night. And that's what you felt like when you were at the Fitzgerald Field House. Now, that night, they were really in the beginning of their first renaissance of Pitt basketball, where they were just becoming a national power. And they were playing an undermanned Providence team that night, and were pretty dominant throughout the game. It was not a game you would put down as a classic, except for this moment, where he comes down and just puts the basketball backboard into 20 million pieces. The place went nuts. And being it was an ESPN Monday night game, all of a sudden you had to wait a half hour till they corrected the problem and put another backboard up. So you had a half hour of doing nothing but going over this play time and time again.
Burton, little trouble. Now they loop it in the right. Nobody's home. Picked off by Miller. Gore's ahead. Lane's on the other wing. He finds. Yeah!
Send it in, Jerome! He joins Darryl Dawkins,
Lucius Jackson,
amongst others. Now you couldn't make it through that hole.
We're gonna be a while.
No, you didn't hang on the rim. It's just a big man.
My goodness.
Hold on at home. Here we go again. We've got to get a cut man in to get the glass out of Jerome's hair.
Hanging by a thread.
This is amazing. A good dish, but he's ready right by the foul line. Bring it down and bring it home, Jerome. You think with their football program they'd get a superior backboard. Once again, impressive jam.
Ripped it down.
Now the budget we had when I coached, I would have gotten fired for that.
That's the word, okay?
There's no question, there's no reason for a technical foul, just inferior equipment and superior body strength. Whoa. Now he's, look at him now, he feels pretty good. He'll be a hero. It's only a deuce, Jerome, relax.
It's a first, though.
A trivia question. That'll work.
We're going to take a break here because we're going to be a while, folks. 15-24 here, first half. Pitt's up by 3. Jerome Lane is up 1 backboard. We'll be back.
That, to me, that's what made it legendary, is because a half hour of this thing, trying to explain it, hearing Bill Raftery's great call at the beginning, and then hearing him talk about it for a half hour after, that took the game or the play to another stratosphere. I mean, it ended up being a rout, but, it's celebrated every year here, and then, on 5 and 10 year increments on ESPN, it's celebrated. But the place went nuts. It was just a it was a play that happened at the right time, at the right place, on national TV.
Yeah, and send it in, Jerome. I mean, I don't know if he's trademarked it yet. I know he's trademarked
Great.
Onions. But Jerome Lane and Charles Smith, right? Those were all Americans at the time. This was in the mid 80s when the Big East was arguably the preeminent and dominant NCAA hoops division, and just legendary. And I think it burnished not only Jerome Lane's career, but Raftery's as well, and Pittsburgh basketball, I think, as being a very solid component of this Big East thing that was still, kind of early years.
Yeah, no, it certainly did. It took for all of them. Lane is a legend here, and I mean, he was a great player, don't get me wrong, but that was a lot of the reason he was a legendary player.
All right, tell me what you and your band of merry reporters are working on now. What else is left to unearth in the history of Pittsburgh sports that hasn't been already fine-tooth combed by you guys already?
We still got a lot. We got a book coming out in January called Integrating Pittsburgh. Story of those brave athletes that helped integrate sports in this area. Just signed a contract to do a book on the 70s, as we talked about before. And I'm also starting a thing with Gary Kinn as part of it. It's called draft412.com, and basically it covers all the draft information and the information about the prospects of the three major Pittsburgh teams.
Fantastic. When are those things coming out? The website is out now. When is the 70s book?
Now, just released, and the 70s book will probably be end of 2023. We're just starting writing it.
Is there a theme or a thread there?
Yeah, it's Pittsburgh's well known as a city of champions in the 70s, but there was a lot of tragedy that happened too. So it's triumph and tragedy, the 1970s in Pittsburgh.
Do you get into the Pittsburgh Triangles at all, World Team Tennis?
Has its chapter, absolutely.
All right, time for us to send it in, Jerome, for another episode. And we thank Dave for regaling us with some of the memorable moments. As always, we just scratch the surface here. You have to recognize that there are literally, a dozen or so stories for each of these facilities that we went over in this brand new book, Where Pittsburgh Played, Oakland's Historic Sports Venues. It is published by our friends at the History Press. It is available wherever good and maybe even not so good books are found. And you will literally find a whole bunch of stories about the Fitzgerald Field House, the Duquesne Gardens, Forbes Field, Pitt Stadium, etc. It's a treasure trove. If you herald yourselves or hearken back to early life in Pittsburgh, maybe you're a Pittsburgh native now, maybe you've just heard of Pittsburgh and maybe some of these teams. All great reasons to get this book. Again, Where Pittsburgh Played, Oakland's Historic Sports Venues. You can find it wherever you find books. Of course, you can find it on our website and maybe give us a little shekel or two of love, of referralness. By doing so, just go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just tool around and find this episode number 281. And on that description, you will see not only some great imagery from some of those great venues, but also a convenient link or two to said book. And like I said, we'll get a couple of referral points from our friends at Amazon. Of course, you'll get the book as quickly as humanly possible, whether it's in paperback or Kindle form. And while you're there, you can check out the seeming multitude of other Dave Finoli either authored or ring-led books about Pittsburgh sports. Just a whole bunch of them. We have the the books on the Igloo, which we talked about in our previous episode. It's just a whole array of great books, and Dave and his friends are making more. And we'll have a couple of some of our favorite titles there on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can follow Dave Finoli on Facebook at David Finoli, Finoli. And you can also check out his new site with a couple of members of his gang there at draft412.com, a new sports site devoted to some aspects, some very cool and real-time aspects of Pittsburgh sports. Again, draft412.com. While you're online, again, bookmark our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at goodseatsstill, on Instagram at goodseatsstillavailable, on Facebook as well at goodseatsstillavailable. You can follow us on YouTube. I believe our new handle will be at goodseatsstillavailable. And as you may know or may not know, we not only publish to all the various podcast platforms out there, so if you're not subscribing or following us now, pick your favorite and do so. You can also listen to us, stream it as you might like, on YouTube as well, on our YouTube channel. So a little streaming / podcast hack for those friends of yours out there who may not be hip to the podcast ways. You can just stream it right online there or from your mobile device by just going to YouTube and finding the Good Seats Still Available channel. It's very simple, very easy. We try to make it easy for you. God, I mean, my goodness. Email, please send us that if you'd like. Please keep it nice and clean. And that's hello at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Let's see, what else? Podfly. I was going to say Podfly Productions. If you remember back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, this quiet little guy in the corner, his name was Jerry Payne, and he was the guy that Podfly Productions, a wonderful organization based in, I think it's in Alabama somewhere. Jerry Payne was this sort of meek little voice sort of in the background of this team of podcast professionals that were exceedingly patient in helping yours truly learn this medium and get our initial almost 3 years worth of episodes up onto the air and into the atmosphere of the internet. And Jerry Payne, God bless him, stuck with us all this time, leaving Podfly Productions for the greener pastures of his own entity, Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. And God bless, he's still with us to this day. We've tried to scare him away. We've tried to frustrate him to no end. And yet he sticks around and takes more of our abuse each and every week. And this week is absolutely no excuse. We throw him the parts and he makes it come out nicely and smoothly. And we appreciate it. As always, Jerry Payne, Audio Excellence. Feel a little love for him. The Atlanta United soccer team not doing this well, not making the playoffs this year. The Braves, as we record this, already lost their first game in the championship or the division series. And the Falcons, well, they're just the Falcons. But Jerry soldiers on, and we appreciate his help as we do each and every week. All right, we've embarrassed him enough. We've embarrassed myself enough. Thank you for listening this far, and we'll see you next week, God willing. Thanks for doing so, and we'll see you. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.